Exposing the narcissist, devaluation. That light bulb moment has arrived. You finally know what you are dealing with. Most likely, you have happened upon the excellent works of one H.G. Tudor, which has provided you with insight that the various silent treatments, beatings, word salads, circular conversations, etc. are the behaviours of a narcissist. You've known that what is happening, or has happened to you, is wrong. You didn't know why it was happening. Your mind took you in a different direction than the actuality of what it was, and you certainly had no idea that you were ensnared by a narcissist. But now you do. You remain in the relationship with the narcissist and in the period of sustained devaluation. The various behaviours, the push and the pull, the up and the down, whether you are the intimate partner primary source in the sustained devaluation, or perhaps you are a secondary source, intimate or non-intimate, that has been on the receiving end of too many corrective devaluations. All of this unpleasant behaviour, abusive behaviour, has caused you to examine the relationship, and you have been able to ascertain that you are dealing with a narcissist. You know what he or she is. In keeping with your empathic traits of honesty, decency, compassion, and most of all, truth-seeker, amongst other characteristics, you start to feel that hard-to-resist pull of wanting to utilize your newfound knowledge. This is not where you want to tell us that you know what we are, although, of course, that forms in your mind. Instead, this is about you wanting to tell the world, everybody else, that we are a narcissist. I do not specifically mean your close and trusted confidants. They may actually already have reservations about us, even if they don't know what we are, and they will need little convincing. Exposing us to them actually has little impact anyway, since we will have identified them at an early juncture as troublemakers and sought to discredit them and isolate you from them already as part of our assertion of control over you and over them. We have in effect dismissed them. This exposure relates to you telling our friends, our family, our work colleagues, our fellow team members, the neighbours, wider friends of yours, people in the community, perhaps the church, and anybody else that you can think of. You are driven by a desire and need to expose us. You want everybody to know the label that describes us. You want everybody to know how we have behaved and to know precisely what that means. You want to detail the seduction, the sudden switch to devaluation, the mind games, the abuse, the push and the pull, the torture, the future faking, the despair, the insidious nature of it, the physical attacks, the disgusting sexual behaviour, the lies and the lies and the lies. You want to create a flyer, a billboard, write a book, create a film, ripping that facade away, removing the veneer, and exposing everything that lies, quite literally and figuratively, underneath. It is not enough to tell people that we are a narcissist. After all, most people don't actually understand what that really means. No, what you want to do is give the world the knowledge that we are a narcissist. And this is everything about it. The ins and the outs, the full Monty, the full horror, the gory detail. You want that spotlight that we crave so often, to turn it into a searing, burning flame of truthful exposure that causes us to shrink away from its illuminating beam, causing us to scuttle away, a pariah, an outcast and a reject, exiled by your exposure of what we truly are. What sweet revenge, what satisfaction to let everybody know just what we are, so that nobody else in the locality falls for the deceit, the fraud, and the seductive contricks ever again. Do you do it? Of course, there are those of you, most likely those who have absorbed the knowledge provided to you and whose character leads this way in an event, who would actually rather focus on your newfound knowledge to get out and stay out, and you are not concerned about achieving an exposure. That is logic. But what about those of you who feel this pressing need, this urge, this drive to expose us to the wider world? You want justice to be delivered. You want the honesty of exposure. You want the decency of people understanding what you have had to deal with. You exhibit compassion. You want the parents to know this is why your son is so difficult. You may want to warn the person that you know that we're having an affair with, even though you are not exactly well predisposed to them. But you then realise that they are just as victim as you are. What ought you to consider? To understand what is likely to happen this step, you become informed in your decision making, and therefore there are two key considerations, two key questions you need to have regard to. When do you do it? And what type of archive are you dealing with? What school of narcissist are you involved with? It is safe to say that no exposure really occurs during seduction. Firstly, next to nobody knows that they're being seduced by a narcissist. You just don't see it. In such an awareness following previous entanglements, you invariably evade the overtures when they first manifest and just get away from the relevant individual. When you become wise to narcissism, and perhaps you're being seduced for a second, third, or fourth time, when you finally spot it, having reduced your emotional thinking and learned the red and black flags, it is more the case that you will just get away from the relevant individual. You don't tend to have a real compulsion to expose in those instances. For the most part, the individual being seduced, however, has no idea that they are being entangled with a narcissist. And of course, the combination of emotional thinking and a lack of information means that there is no thought of such exposure. Exposure often occurs at a much later stage, and exposure may be something that springs to mind during devaluation. It is still reasonably uncommon, however, for someone to realise that they are in the grip of a narcissist whilst they are being devalued. This enlightenment usually occurs post-disengagement or in subsequent entanglements following successful hoovers. However, let us take the instance whereby you know the treatment you are receiving is wrong, and you have been able to learn that what you are involved in is the narcissistic dynamic, and the person who you love, but whose love for you has turned to this horrific devaluation, is indeed a narcissist. It's noteworthy at this juncture that the prospects of exposure still remain slim, because even though you may know who you are dealing with, the emotional thinking that has a hold on you, combined with your empathic traits, actually fights against exposing that person. You're actually more likely to want to let them know what they are in order to try and help, in order to try and fix things, to try and change things, to try and get back to the golden period. You are more likely to try and make sense of the ongoing relationship rather than blow it wide open by exposing our behaviour to lots of other people. You, of course, are unlikely to have grasped that such a step is futile in terms of trying to preserve and fix, somehow make the relationship manageable. Or, even if you have been told that this cannot be done, the height of your emotional thinking, because you are repeatedly interacting with us on a daily basis, is too great, and it overrides the logic that you've been provided. You are told, this person is a narcissist, you can't heal them, you can't fix them, you can't manage the relationship, it will not work. But notwithstanding hearing those words of logic, your emotional thinking is so high, it rejects the logic and you continue to try. Accordingly, exposure of the narcissist during devaluation is uncommon, owing to first a lack of knowledge, and then, even if the knowledge is acquired, a failure to apply it, owing to the presence of emotional thinking that prevails. Now, let us assume, however, that you have gained this knowledge and you have a resolution to expose the narcissist to the wider world. Should you proceed to do this when you remain in the devaluation, how will the narcissist respond to what you're doing? Lesser narcissists. If you expose what the lesser narcissist is doing to third parties, Word will get back to the narcissist. Remember, the lesser narcissist does not know what he or she is. Your behavior in the conscious mind of the narcissist is seen as extreme treachery, an unworthy criticism, disloyalty. What's really happening is that your exposure is threatening the narcissist's control of both you and the people that you have exposed the narcissist to. Those other people might actually regard the narcissist as relatively decent and likable, and therefore you will face resistance from those individuals. However, for the most part, many of those individuals will probably have some inkling as to the behaviours of the narcissist. They are unlikely to realise the individual is a narcissist. They'll probably have been on the receiving end of bouts of temper, the unleashing of heated, ignited fury. The parents will have known throughout the lives of this individual that he can have a bit of an issue with anger. Brothers and sisters say, oh yeah, he can really lose it sometimes. Friends say, he's okay, but sometimes he can be an asshole. They don't realise what they're dealing with. Whilst you might face some resistance, it's not substantial, because there will have been repeated instances of the devaluing behaviour of the narcissist being exhibited to these other people. They will, of course, not attribute it to them being a narcissist. Instead, it will be linked to excuses such as fatigue, stress, drink, or such like. There is also the potential that you will have already been smeared as a consequence of the need to indirectly control you, and therefore your credibility of exposure will be damaged. Accordingly, subject to the quality of the evidence that you have and its independence, you may not actually succeed in your attempted exposure to begin with. Even where people know that the individual engages in unpleasant behaviours, and because they have witnessed it themselves, and therefore it is not too great a leap of the imagination to believe that you are experiencing them, they are unlikely to grasp that the individual is a narcissist, and instead they will fall back into platitudes of, you just have to work round him. Sometimes you just have to suck it up and deal with it. Well, we've all seen him like that. He'll calm down eventually. They don't realise that this is a repeated and permanent and destructive behaviour, and therefore the true intent of your exposure will fail. The main issue, however, is not so much of the fact that you may not be able to convince the third parties that you are ensnared by a narcissist and being devalued, but rather the response of the narcissist when he learns, and he will, of your exposure. This will wound the narcissist. It will result in the ignition of the lesser's heated fury. You can expect that it will be savage and brutal, as you are, in effect, tearing down his crafted world and leaving him exposed in the wilderness with a lack of control. You are affecting fuel provision from both you and other aspects of the fuel matrix. Through his narcissistic perspective, he will regard this as a carefully orchestrated assault against him. You are treacherous and a traitor. His narcissism will be going into overdrive at an unconscious level to cause him to assert control over you. You are likely to be in danger of physical assault, property damage, heated verbal assaults, a raging fury. Since you have done this during devaluation and are likely to be still living with the narcissist, or at least the narcissist knows where to find you, you'll be placing yourself in considerable danger. Even the upper lesser type A, who is less prone to physical violence, will respond in a very unpleasant way. You'll be subjected to their verbal tirade, quite possibly even physical violence with the upper lesser type A. The lower lesser and the middle lesser will come at you with physical violence, verbal tirades, smashing things up. Upper lesser A and upper lesser B, they may counter your exposure by not only attacking you verbally and possibly physically, but with greater energy levels and greater access to resources, they will look to counter the smear by going around and telling everybody else what a liar you are, and utilizing the coterie to assist them in this. Upper letter type A and upper letter type B tend to be more financially successful, and therefore they may well put to work this additional resource, in effect by bribing people to take against you, by bribing individuals to lie about you as a part of an instinctive response to dealing with your threat to their control. If you expose lesser narcissists whilst you're being devalued, you can expect a most unpleasant response, and one which is highly likely to be dangerous to you in terms of physical safety. And therefore, you should think very carefully indeed about exposing during devaluation. You will be better suited to focusing your efforts on using your newfound knowledge to get out and stay out and impose a no-contact regime. The mid-range narcissist. Word will again reach the mid-ranger of what you are doing. You will face two considerable problems where you're seeking to expose the narcissist during devaluation, where you're dealing with the mid-range narcissist. The first is you will come up against the facade of the narcissist. Mid-range narcissists use a facade of being a good person, being helpful, being caring, and you will buffet up against that. The lower mid-range narcissist's facade is intermittent. Sometimes it applies, sometimes it does not, and therefore those individuals you expose the lower mid-range narcissist to may well have seen some occasional instances of devaluing behavior. Either they'll have witnessed it towards you, or sometimes they will have experienced it themselves. When you're dealing with middle mid-range, A or B, or upper mid-range, it is most likely that those people who are third parties, those other secondary sources, those tertiary sources, will have no idea about the dark side of this individual. They will have been taken in by the facade, believing them to be kind, helpful, a pillar of the community, a faithful, church-going individual who behaves in a pleasant, caring, compassionate way, completely taken in by this fake cognitive empathy. Furthermore, the charm and easy manner of the upper mid-ranger in particular will take individuals in, so that even where their haughtiness might have been experienced, people put it down to the fact that, well, he does hold a very high-pressure position, so he's bound to get irritable once in a while, and when you're as successful as him, he's got a lot on his mind. Accordingly, the facade that is generated by the mid-range narcissist proves particularly hard for you, and, driven by high emotional thinking, corrupting your empathic trait of truth seeker, your repeated attempts to persuade the individuals who form part of this facade is likely to fail. You will invariably present as frazzled, exhausted, frightened, upset, angry, in contrast to the cool, quiet, considered manner of the narcissist. Therefore, even if the narcissist has not smeared you beforehand, the existence of the facade is going to prove particularly difficult in persuading those individuals that this person is a narcissist. It becomes even harder where there has been smearing of you, where the narcissist, of course, has done this as the indirect assertion of control over you as a consequence of previous behaviours of yours which have threatened his control. Therefore, the seeds of your misbehaviour, the seeds of your abusive conduct, have been intermittently and instinctively sown by the mid-range narcissist, woven into this facade, and therefore you come up against two problems. First of all, you are trying to convince people who have only ever seen the narcissist as a decent person that he is not decent. Furthermore, you are coming at them with dirty hands. You have been smeared, and therefore, in the minds of these individuals, they are likely to see your protestations as more unpleasant behaviour on your part. This will frustrate you, upset you, and anger you, and with your increased emotional thinking, because your exposure is a consequence of doing something in relation to the narcissist, talking about the narcissist and thinking about the narcissist, you will only keep your emotional thinking even higher. You will present as the hysterical female, the obsessive boyfriend, and it will work against you. Such attempts at exposure during devaluation are invariably doomed to failure. The only area where you might meet with some success is where you approach this in a calm and considered manner with independent, impeccable evidence. But even then, it will not be straightforward. What will be the response of the narcissist to this? You, of course, will wound the narcissist, causing ignition of fury. You're challenging the narcissist's control. All mid-range narcissists will do two things. They will assert control over you directly, and they will indirectly assert control over you by fighting against your exposure, by fortifying the facade with these third parties, which of course is also a direct assertion of control over these third parties by the narcissist. The lower mid-range narcissist is likely to come at you with heated fury. He's likely to accuse. There may be mild physical violence. There will be a verbal tirade, maybe some property destruction, but it will be an unpleasant blast of heated fury, castigating you for going around telling lies, stirring it up, spreading bullshit about the narcissist. The middle mid-range narcissist type A and type B will launch into the affirmation of how good a person they are, castigating you for how could you do this to me after everything that I've done, and will roll out the pity plays. I can't believe that you go around telling lies. Look at what we've got here. Why do you want to spoil all of this? I don't understand what's wrong with you. There will be some insult in there. You'll be labelled as crazy, unhinged. You are unlikely to face physical violence. Instead, you'll be made to feel guilty, made to feel an awful person. You'll be subjected to lengthy monologues explaining how the narcissist has only ever done what is best for you and the family, and that he cannot understand what is wrong with you, so that you go and poison the minds of other people. Accordingly, amongst all of that, they will start off with the pity plays. You will then experience silent treatments, and they may well move to threat as well. If you continue with this, I will do this instead. With the upper mid-ranger, they will use a combination of haughtiness with you. You will receive verbal violence. It's unlikely to move to physical violence. The upper mid-ranger, having an improved cognitive function, their narcissism will have a degree of regard for ensuring that as they assert control, they are not creating a new problem. Physical violence would do that. They will dole out some charm as well. You've nothing to complain about. Look at what we have here. Come on, let's sort out this nonsense. There will also be threat, however. You'll be told in no uncertain terms that you are to stop this behaviour, and with the upper mid-ranger, they are likely to come with you to put on a united front to demonstrate that all is well. You will be made to perpetuate the facade and to apologise. You'll be patronised. She's not been particularly well. She's got a lot on. And in many instances, the victim will go along with this, browbeaten and subjugated by the controlling nature of the upper mid-range narcissist. Accordingly, with any of the mid-rangers, if you expose him or her during devaluation, you will run up against the facade, and the narcissist attempts to bolster that facade by countering your exposure, and then the narcissist will confront you. In some instances, your exposure might even bring about disengagement. But to begin with, the narcissist will look to assert control over you in the manners that I have described. You will be painted as the villain of the piece for telling tales and spoiling which, to the outside world, looked like a perfect relationship. The greater narcissist. How will the greater narcissist react, and what will happen if you decide to expose him or her during devaluation? The more extensive cognitive function of the greater narcissist combined with wider networks means that he or she will be aware of your treachery very quickly indeed. First of all, you have next to no chance at all of affecting the facade. The powers of the greater narcissist, which will be such that most people will be completely brainwashed to the virtues of the greater and will not accept what they are being told about the greater. Furthermore, subject to the proximity of your disengagement, which may well be in the post, you are likely to have been repeatedly smeared, and very effectively indeed. You'll have been smeared without you even knowing about it, in a subtle and convincing way, so that when you do appear, your words will be treated with skepticism. You'll be portrayed as an habitual liar. You'll be given patronizing sympathy because you have been portrayed as a fantasist. You might be treated with scorn. You have been described as an abuser. Or you may even receive disgust, as you've been labelled as a particularly ungrateful individual, living such a gilded lifestyle, and then you have the audacity to turn on the hand that feeds you and bite it. Furthermore, since your treacherous exposure will be learned of faster than in the situation of the lesser or mid-range narcissist, the considerable propaganda machine of the greater will have been wheeled out in order to extinguish your ill-founded gossip and ramblings. The combination of brainwashing, prompt propaganda response and smearing makes it nigh on impossible for you to impact upon the facade of the greater narcissist. Your evidence will have to be extremely convincing and to have been delivered without there being a corresponding smear. The greater narcissist facade will again, like that of the mid-ranger, be used against you. But this facade is not only one of being generally a decent person rather than being an overly good person, but is also one of generosity. Many people in the coterie and the wider fuel matrix of the greater narcissist have benefited from the largesse of the greater, and therefore, not only are they unlikely to believe what you have to say, because it just doesn't seem possible, even if they entertain the thought of what you are saying, they are unlikely to want to disturb the status quo. They will not want to lose the patronage of the greater narcissist. They have more to lose from doing so, and, should you be forcing them to pick sides, they will not choose yours. What about the way that the narcissist will respond to you upon learning of your attempted exposure of them through devaluation? The greater will launch a charm offensive with you. You will experience a respite hoover and a reinstatement of the golden period. His or her ability to charm, explain, smooth over, and ease your concerns will cause your resolve to waver. You will actually start to doubt whether you actually have experienced the devaluation that you are referring to. The greater's response will appear so convincing that you will be persuaded to think that you have wrongly labelled them as a narcissist. The greater, of course, knows what he or she is, but will never admit it, and instead will play to your sense of wanting to seek the truth, to understand, to heal by sitting down with you and listening to your concerns. He or she knows that rather than have you tell the wider world what he or she is, it's far better to keep it between you and him. That way, he causes you to shift your focus so his facade is left intact. The greater might even go so far to admit that he's got some issues or problems and ask for your help to address them, not in a pity play way, not with regard to a sympathy symphony, but rather, let's get this sorted. Okay, I can see why you might think that. Why don't we do something about it? An optimistic, cheery, constructive way of dealing with it, though of course it will never happen. This is just lip service. The greater knows that he or she is better served by not reinforcing the public image of being a narcissist through abuse, but rather charming you again, and casting your conclusion into considerable doubt. The greater is not going to start by lashing out at you, but rather by laying on the charm and removing your concerns and fears. This technique, combined with the return of the addictive golden period and your inherent emotional thinking, means that you are more than likely to halt your exposure. If you have ever threatened to expose the narcissist who is a greater, your threat will dissipate disappear into the wind as you are charmed into not doing it. Having successfully prevented the exposure in the first place, or halted it in mid-step through the application of charm, the greater is now forewarned as to your knowledge. The greater narcissist will now maintain a period of respite, but will be calculating and plotting to smear you into oblivion and then disengage from you, so that when you try to revisit the exposure post-disengagement, you will fail. The greater narcissist has got there in first. As for the ultra, you can expect a more concerted version, more intense version of the greater's behaviour. Indeed, the behaviour will be such that the ultra is likely to anticipate that you are about to attempt an exposure and head it off at the pass through the application of charm, assurance, and convincing you that you've just imagined it all, that there is nothing really to be troubled by, and that it can all be resolved, that your concerns are not really concerns, and where there is even the slight acknowledgement that they are, that really, do you want to spoil everything that has been created? You will be stripped down to remove the need to assert any threat to the control of the ultra. The ultra will detect that you're about to do this. The ultra will detect that you are contemplating a form of exposure through the devaluation, and will therefore apply considerable ability to prevent it going any further, so nobody even gets to hear about your exposure, and the facade of the ultra remains completely intact. Not a single dent applied to it. Accordingly, these are the likely scenarios when you are attempting to expose the narcissist to the wider world during devaluation. It is highly problematic. Apart from the lesser, you will come up against the facade, and your will to succeed will be drained as you crash against it with the mid-rangers, the greater and the ultra. Thereafter, with all of the narcissists who are lesser and mid-range, you will receive an unpleasant response. The greater and the ultra will use charm against you, but you will, in due course, pay for your treachery. It has been logged, you will be punished, and you will then be disengaged from. It is only the greater and the ultra that in effect make a note of this treachery, and in a way, treat you like a child, almost forgiving you, but it's not forgotten. And whilst they layer you with charm, you will then feel the sting of your treachery as you are punished at some later stage when you don't even see it coming. And therefore, with the lesser, you will face a very unpleasant and dangerous response. With the mid-rangers, you will face an unpleasant response and crash against the facade. With the greaters, you will not have an unpleasant response, but rather a charming and helpful one. You will also go up against the facade, and you will have a later downside through a particularly vicious devaluation and disengagement. And with the ultra, your attempt to expose will be stopped before it even starts. It will be dealt with by way of charm, but similarly, you will also be horribly punished at a later juncture and disengaged from for your crime. In summary, therefore, when you learn that you're dealing with the narcissist during devaluation, even though it is somewhat uncommon, seeking exposure is not sensible for the reasons explained. Instead, focus on your own defences. Get out and stay out. Use the logic of a total no-contact regime to protect yourself, rather than continuing the fight with the narcissist by exposure. The devil's pitchfork will visit you, and you'll come across all of the problems that I've outlined in this video. You are far better focusing on staying away from the narcissist. If you are to contemplate exposure, it is something that might be considered post-escape or post-disengagement rather. Do not attempt it for the reasons explained during your devaluation. No matter how tempting it is, no matter how unfair it may seem not to expose at that juncture, it is going to work against you, as I have explained. Get out and stay out. A further video will address the concept of exposure of the narcissist, either when you have escaped or when you have been disengaged from. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.